Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening to the Hugh Hewitt Show this morning from Studio North. I am joined by Tevi Troy. Tevi is a presidential historian who's prolific. He's got two great pieces, one in the Washington Examiner from a couple of days ago, Biden Faces a Mutiny, and one in the Wall Street Journal this morning, Biden's Dithering Irks White House Staff. Let's take them in the order you wrote them. Tevi, good morning. How are you?
Hey, Hugh. Thanks, and always great to be on the show.
Well, I love this Washington Examiner piece because you run through the intra-party challenges to a sitting president. 1912, Teddy Roosevelt against William Howard Taft. 1968, Eugene McCarthy against Lyndon Johnson. Of course, Estes Kefauver was in between there, challenging Truman in 52. The very famous 1976 Reagan versus Ford. I was with Ford on that. I was against the tide of history. And then we've got 1980 Jimmy Carter and Teddy Kennedy, which was bloody and long. And then, of course, the 1992 Pat Buchanan insurgency against George H.W. Bush. Of all of those, to what is the greatest parallel to where Biden finds himself today, Tevi Troy?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say probably 80, the Carter versus Kennedy one. Inflation, difficult time, economically difficult time around the world, and someone more charismatic comes from the left challenge. We don't know who that is yet. But the really interesting thing is that in all those races you mentioned, and that I put in the article, Hugh, the incumbent president never won election again after being challenged, and none of the challengers became president in that cycle.
Because when you bleed out. And if you get wounded in a primary like Pat Buchanan did to W and Ross Perot did to HW, you'll bleed out politically. I think the parallel to me, Tevi, is 1968. Because if Biden runs, he's going to run from an incredibly divisive position and a party that does not like him. And as you say, a staff that thinks he's dithering, Mr. Magoo. You didn't say Mr. Magoo, I did. And therefore, yeah, he may not lose New Hampshire, but someone will do to him what Eugene McCarthy did to LBJ, and then the floodgates will open.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, there is that sense, as in 68, that nobody wants to go first, in part because of the history that I lay out. If you know that running will damage your own party in the upcoming presidential election, you don't want to be tagged as the guy who's disloyal. And so that's why everybody's kind of waiting to see if somebody else will jump in first. So 68.
Yeah, the Washington Post runs a pundit. All the columnists do predictions. And so this week is who's going to be the favorite for the Democratic nominee if Biden doesn't run. And my five are Gavin Newsom 1, Pete Buttigieg 2, Gina Raimondo 3, Josh Shapiro, assuming he wins and he's going to win in Pennsylvania 4, and then Ro Khanna, simply because someone's got to fly the Sanders flag. And they're all not Kamala Harris. I think that's my key point. I don't think she's kind of like Hubert Humphrey without the likelihood of getting the boss's endorsement.
Yeah, look, I don't have any inside information on this, Hugh, but I read a lot on this stuff, and the articles suggest that she is quietly reaching out for fundraising help from some of the big donors. She's obviously the vice president, and she's got name recognition, and her political skills are clearly questionable, as you've well laid out on the show. But I wouldn't count her out at this point yet.
It's interesting. I counted her in way too long in 2020, and maybe I'm counting her out too early in 2024, but my gosh, she never fails to disappoint. Tevi Troy, in terms of the White House staff, this is well known about the president. He's not decisive. At what point, how do they signal this? What do they do? You can't really make an old man young.
Yeah, I would actually question this, that whether it's well known that Biden's not decisive. I mean, I think he has been somewhat decisive in the past. I think the issue here, and what I lay out in the Journal column, is that there's this new narrative developing that current Biden 28.0, is less decisive, and it's a problem. And how does the staff know? How does the staff always let people know? They leak to the media, right? There was that piece in CNN. There was the piece in Political that let it out that the staff is irked, or that there are bottlenecks and indecision is plaguing the White House, and that some decisions have lingered for over a year. So I think it is an interesting new narrative and something we've got to watch closely.
Tevi, I'm going to be very interested because you're very fair. As you reflect on older people that you have known and what happens to their decision-making skills, and I do not believe the president is incompetent. I do think he's infirm, but infirm in the way any 80-year-old is infirm. Slow, not very eager to change positions, not very flexible or fluid, as Arthur Brooks would say, in the intake of new information, and sometimes bitterly stubborn about things. What percentage of this is Biden aging, and not all that nonsense about dementia? He's got dementia, but he's infirm. What extent of the dithering goes with being old and confronted with new facts?
I think a portion, but I think another portion is being the president, right? Invested with these huge powers and these huge responsibilities. And what I say in the article is that he had a couple of early decisions that didn't work out so well for him. The decision that, hey, let's go big and be LBJ or FDR with a really narrow majority, how things went in Afghanistan. I mean, he was decisive on the Afghanistan thing. I disagreed with how he went, but he was quite decisive there. And I think the power of the office and the import and the long-term historical resonance of these decisions, I think, may be challenging.
Yeah, a kid with a lightsaber, or an old man with a lightsaber. It's you cut through stuff, and all of a sudden you've got tens of thousands of Americans, green card holders, and SIV applicants stuck in Afghanistan with a ruthless Taliban, and we're coming up on the 1 year anniversary of that. Tevi, you remember the 1 year anniversary of Katrina and how W was hauled over the coals. Are we going to get a 1 year anniversary on Afghanistan with the same kind of look back?
I doubt it. I mean, I think there'll be some of it, but so people forget. But the press had a special glee in going after W, for whom, as you know, I worked in the White House, and I think they were just so eager to write those 1 year after pieces.
Oh, I know. I could not agree more. I'm on a jihad against the use of 100% because it's spread like kudzu throughout the culture. But I could not agree more, Tevi, that the Katrina anniversary was the part of the campaign against W by legacy media. And the parallel for catastrophic decision-making early on is the decision to close Bagram, followed by the consequences. So the decision not to evacuate, followed by the consequences. Actually, by W, it was the decision to defer to the governor and the mayor, wasn't it?
Yeah, but also, it took a while before he left on the vacation, and he flew over, which was a really bad photo op. I mean, there were mistakes, and again, I was sorry to recount them because I was on the White House staff at the time, but I've written about some of the mistakes he made in that circumstance that did not work out so well.
Okay, so the next piece I hope you attempt is the worst presidential year ever. I always tell people they're going to have a worse year in their adult life and a best year. And you get through the worst so that eventually you enjoy the best and maybe a few great ones with grandchildren. But the worst year for W with 05. That begins with Terry Schiavo. It goes with the attempt to reform Social Security that is bottled up by Harry Reid. It is followed by Harriet Myers and Katrina, and it's the nightmare in Afghanistan and Iraq grows worse. It's the worst year. Has Biden had his worst year?
It's quite possible because this year was pretty awful. And you talk about Afghanistan, and maybe the legacy media won't focus on the 1 year anniversary. But Afghanistan clearly took a hit. Biden's approval ratings weren't that bad before Afghanistan. It was really
never recovered
down. And then obviously inflation exploded and energy prices and the Ukraine invasion. And so suddenly people were saying, hey, maybe this Biden pick wasn't such a great one. So yeah, it's been a pretty bad year. But you can look at the Carter administration as a succession of bad years. It's not like there was a great year in there, and it seems in some ways with Carter things were getting worse. And in fact, there were a lot of bad things going on in Carter before the Iran hostage situation emerged, and then obviously the debacle where they tried the failed rescue. So things just, sometimes when things are bad, they just keep cascading and getting worse.
The difference with Carter is that he was a young man, and he adapted to the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviet Union, and he armed the Mujahideen, and he built defense spending up. Is there any pivot that Joe can make that would be as dramatic as when the president said he had been paralyzed by an inordinate fear of communism?
Yeah, I think it is possible. I mean, he sold himself as this moderate. As you and I know, Hugh, he's not an actual moderate, but kind of a moderate, in that he's between the left wing and the moderate wing of the Democratic Party, not in the moderate sense in the whole country. But I think he could pivot after an election loss. And I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal last month about the ways presidents have pivoted and how to plan for that in advance. So I think it's possible. I just don't think the way he's been kowtowing to the left wing of the party makes it likely.
It's a fascinating couple of pieces, Tevi. Well done on both of them. I just tweeted them both out. You should be following Tevi Troy on Twitter and reading everything he does because a historian is someone to be contend with. Thank you, Tevi. Always a pleasure to talk to you.